For anyone that's interested in autonomous science or in wearables technology, we're doing back-to-back research days in late April in San Francisco on April 23rd and 24th. So please email me or DM me if you'd like to join those.
This is the Nucleate Podcast, the voice of the next generation of biotech leaders.
Welcome to the Nucleate Podcast. I'm Anastasia and I'll be your host today. On today's episode, we talk to Shelby Newsad, a partner at Compound, which is a thesis-driven venture capital firm based in New York that backs founders at the forefront of biology, healthcare, AI, robotics, and crypto. Shelby is committed to advancing technologies in bio and health and sees incredible potential in broadening the use cases and improving efficiency across these sectors. Before investing in Compound, they worked as a bioscience researcher across plant sciences, with PhD from University of Cambridge, neuroscience with NIH, and drug discovery with Health Policy Institute. As a former researcher and technologist at heart, Shelby loves getting deep into the tech with founders and actively supports more than 20 bio and health investment theses. They are dedicated to being high-context, deeply helpful thought partner for companies building the future of bio and health. Shelby also writes about the future of biology, healthcare, and human enhancement in their blog. If you're curious about their work or the thesis they're exploring, definitely check it out. And feel free to reach out if you'd like to dive deeper into the science with them. We love recording this conversation and hope you enjoy it too. I don't know how much time we spent building this up. It's amazing to be here. Thank you very much, Shelby, for having us here in the Compound headquarters. It's an amazing energy. And we are, as the Nucleate Podcast, we are very thrilled to have you here with us today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. I'm excited to speak and really a big fan of what Nucleate is doing.
Amazing. So I think we have a lot to cover today, a lot of amazing stuff. Before we dive into that, I think right now we ask every founder this, like to start from the beginnings, like from where you grew up, how your childhood was like, what made you interested in science in the first place, any failed experiments that you did as a kid.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe kind of like you, I don't come from a place where going into biotech is like the most common thing for my peers. And yeah, I'm from a small town in Appalachia, Beverly, Ohio is what it's called, represent. And yeah, had a pretty normal background. I was a first generation college student. So in order to go to college in the first place was a big thing, but I always knew I wanted to study something science related. And just different iterations around that during college, from like initially pre-med to really being impressed and awed by the potential of societal level change that you can have with a research career, to then going through a disillusionment and understanding that commercialization is actually probably the best place to enact change. But yeah, I would say it was always like, yeah, biology was always like the best subject and the most intrinsically motivating one. And yeah, I just saw it as always inherently valuable if you knew how to cure someone, cure something about the world. Yeah.
So that's interesting what you just said. So basically you were in the pre-med track, so I suppose you want to become a doctor.
Yeah.
Because you wanted this to have this kind of I am curing people, I am here, I'm the first responder, I'm the one who makes the change between life and death. But at some point you switched, and also this notion, like what you said right now, is just, at some point I understood that commercialization is the way to go at some point. Can you elaborate on that? Like, what experience did you have, and at what point did you just like a little bit more on how did you realize that?
Yeah, I mean, I just seen a few different scientific projects and findings just sit on the shelf. In one of my first labs, we had some unpublished data because we couldn't figure out the mechanism, but we saw that acetaminophen, the active metabolite of acetaminophen, actually killed cancer cells, Burkitt's lymphoma cells, in a dose-dependent way. And it was just astounding to me that not more people were jumping on top of this. And yeah, so I started to be like, okay, the core bottleneck here is actually like getting people to care. Once they do care, like understanding how to build a business in biotech, understanding like how you get through the regulatory bodies, eventually how you sell drugs and market them and get them reimbursed. So yeah, I guess it was just a like series of like evolving understanding about how how to enact change and also how to bring new technologies to life.
So you had a very interesting path. So you did a lot of research, then you did consulting, then you did due diligence for a company, and right now you're in venture. So is the thread of you trying to understand commercialization and science from different aspects, or was it more, kind of at this point in your career that you just wanted to try something else, but there was no grand picture like it is right now when you look at this backwards?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think the grand picture was always kind of like the ikigai, like what are your strengths? What are you interested in? And what do you enjoy doing? And so for me, circulating around all of these different things, it was only like it was only part-time consulting and part-time diligence while I was doing my PhD. But all of these things I was trying to understand, where can I best help people? Because the last thing I would want to do is have something that I enjoy, but I'm bad at. That's really, even though it's intrinsically good, I want other people to derive value from what I'm doing too. So yeah, I thought venture was a good confluence of those things. And as a PhD and technologist myself, I felt like building rapport with scientists is really natural, and getting excited about their work and also getting up to speed on it was something I really enjoyed doing and was good at. And then, yeah, with my various roles before of, working part-time at different venture firms, working, doing an internship in big pharma at German Merck, those gave me a commercial lens to hopefully be value add to our companies as well.
Another interesting aspect that you mentioned is that at some point you got frustrated and you said, oh, there is so much going on, so much innovation happening in academia, but the surprise of realizing that not a lot of people think beyond academia, think beyond of what is possible. So how did this change throughout your experiences? And what would you say is the roadblock that prevents academic, like amazing technology, amazing findings from academia being translated into real world?
I think it is this ecosystem awareness level that a lot of people have, because everyone in academia tells you to keep your head down, just focus on your project, just get your papers out. But that's not actually how the world works. And if you want to transition out of academia after your PhD, you probably should have been doing part-time work in the direction that you want to go after. So I think there's like this perverse incentive structure with academia because they want to get out everything they can from you, understandably, but it doesn't necessarily look out for your best interests. But I had the privilege before my PhD, I did a science business master's. It's called the Bioscience Enterprise Program. And that was basically like an MBA for bioscientists and exposed us to venture capital, consulting, pharma business development, IP, risk, all of these different options that, where I felt like I I knew the potential roles that I could go into after.
What would you say that taking such courses, like doing like a small science MBA, STEM MBA, is something that would be beneficial for all scientists, or would you just say, oh, we need those basic scientists who just think about like this project and pushing it forward, and we need those people who push the boundaries and go beyond what's possible just in academia?
I think ideally everyone would have some context into the broader ecosystem. I mean, in finance, for example, when you have a CFA exam, you're quizzed on really broad aspects of the financial industry, from like tax law. One of my friends is taking now and is saying they have to go into like municipalities finances and just like really, a really wild breadth. And I think in bioscience, because it is technology that you're building and the technology needs to be commercialized, I think every bioscientist should know where they fit in the context of the whole industry.
And this brings us to your current work at Compound, and we're gonna dive into what Compound is and what's special about Compound in a minute. But before we go into that, you call yourself a super high context thought partner. What does it mean in real life, and especially when you're working with early stage founders?
Yeah, we do. So Compound is a thesis-driven, research-centric investment firm. We invest across AI, robotics, and crypto, and we also look at those things applied to bio and healthcare. And currently in bio, we have about 25 investment theses that we actively update and pursue and invest in. And through these deep dives in the different areas, we write blog articles about them, interact with researchers and operators in the field, try and understand the big players and speak to them as well. And all of those things together mean that we kind of become an ecosystem around these different thesis areas. We have an ecosystem, that we can help give our founders. And through that, we strive to be the highest context investors on any of our company's cap tables, helping with hiring, helping with setting concrete milestones that could attract later stage investors, understanding how technical unlocks give more commercial opportunities and how.
That's very interesting. So your approach is not just, kind of looking at the company that pitches you and then deciding whether to go for it or not, but actually going backwards and trying to identify those fields of high unmet need and super interesting fields, emerging fields, be like building rapport in this field, having the best understanding possible about the field, and then look at the companies that try to get some like guidance, investments from you from this angle. Like, so can you walk us through your thesis? Like, when do you decide this is an emerging field that we need a thesis on? Yes, basically we're looking at time frame of like in 10 years and in like or like 10, 20, 30 years. So how do you decide something that's maybe very early and you see just small, like tiny incremental improvements being successful in like 20, 30 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. And something there's always tension on with deciding what to work on and what to build theses on, because there's only so many hours in the day, and there's thousands of different topics you could look at. But normally, what the confluence of factors is technical unlocks being achieved or projected to be achieved, growing markets and multiple expansion in those markets. For example, in biosecurity is a place where we've spent a lot of time. And today we don't think there's $100 million business to be built there, but I think it's very clear on the 10-year time horizon that with everyone having access to LLMs, with science being more efficacious in terms of like throughput and our ability to predict the outcome of experiments, all of this means that the threat of bioterrorism will be much higher on a 10-year timescale. So that's something where we're willing to, we've extrapolated the current world and the current technical unlocks and see that as a big potential. So technical unlocks, expanding market, and also things that are underappreciated. I think we have a frame in compound that if you're not too early, you're too late. And really being ahead of the curve in terms of understanding these areas and how they're evolving is how we really like to work. And we're doing this similar work in biohacking as well. We spend a lot of time there because we think that'll really go a lot more mainstream and autonomous science. Yeah.
Very interesting what you said. If you're not too early, you're too late.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you distinguish between ideas that are still early but right versus early and wrong?
I think there's a few ways. I think it's like, a big part of our job is technical diligence. And so really getting into the papers, talking to researchers, and really understanding hype from reality is a really core aspect of our job and can filter out a lot of things that might be wrong. But on the other side, if the expected value or if this technical unlock does happen and it 10x's the potential of a market, then that's still a good potential investment for us. So I think, the business model of venture is to have ideally 5 or more unicorns from each fund. But in reality, if you just have like 2 or 3 unicorns from each fund, you're still in you are a top percentile venture capital firm. Mm-hmm. So that's part of it as well, is like, this is high risk game. And I think there's more risk as a venture capital not to take big upside bets than there is taking like shorter, nearer term bets.
What would you tell to the founders? Because this is a very unique position that you are in, and also a unique lens. And right now, like, it's also told that it's easier to work on something that a lot of people do versus, kind of just breaking barriers and going beyond what's possible now. So it's a very daunting pathway, and looking at other, kind of at the investment landscape, I feel a lot of founders are, kind of, they don't have this courage to go out and be like work on something that nobody's working right now, because like they might not get the investments or they might not get the money, because like it's easier to work on something that's everyone's doing right now, that like most people are doing right now. So what advice would you give to founders who might think about something that might be amazing in 20 years, but struggle to get out and get the support they need because nobody understands it?
Yeah, I think that as a founder, it's a very it's a very similar process that VCs have to do, which is looking at the meta landscape of an ecosystem, doing future casting of all of the different areas of that ecosystem, and then understanding where you want to place your, as a founder, time investment for the next 10 years. So there's really, so the meta level understanding of like where the world is going is really important. And I think the deeper point is that all large successful companies are N-of-1s in some ways and are really unique. And we see that with our portfolio, where a couple of our most successful companies so far seemed like impossible businesses when the first investment was made 5 to 7 years ago. So Runway ML is a generative video design platform. Wave AI is an end-to-end autonomous vehicle company. And both of those at the time were really contrary to what the consensus was in the field. And I think as a firm, where a lot of VCs like to invest in consensus things, we're drawn to the opposite, to the contrary theses. And because from what we've seen from our portfolio and understanding really large companies, I think even OpenAI is an example of this. Like no one really cared what OpenAI was doing until ChatGPT came out. And before then, they thought Sam was crazy for being like, we're going to make AGI. But yeah, so I think another, like just the third point of that is technology moves a lot faster than what people think. And for founders to be able to feel that and see it and build towards that is really special and a powerful skill too.
So last time you met, you also mentioned, or maybe it was something that I wanted to hear, is basically if you have a clear understanding of a field and you have a thesis there, but you don't find the right fit of the companies. So that you mentioned that you're thinking about incubating those ideas and companies yourself.
Yeah.
So curious about the latest updates on that.
Yeah, we are pursuing incubations in areas where we feel like we have a special edge in understanding and an edge in terms of talent networks too. Most theses we don't try and do an incubation, mainly because we are investors, we're not founders. But sometimes it makes sense to roll our sleeves up and really get involved in trying to get a company off the ground.
So you don't have to disclose obviously anything, but kind of just in the broad strokes for our listeners to understand like what these companies are, what was the unmet need that you didn't see being fulfilled by other companies in the space, and why do you think this might work versus other approaches that are out there?
Yeah, so I'll give one example. We've seen in the agricultural space that the end products that people choose are particularly low margin and very highly regulated in terms of food. So one of our incubations right now is around plant engineering for high value products that have lower regulation burdens. So like that aren't essentially plant products that aren't food. And we've been spending a lot of time there and speaking to a lot of folks and trying to get something off the ground. So if any of the listeners are great plant engineers, send me a DM. Would love to chat.
Yeah, so you heard that. Basically reach out if you have any great ideas, any crazy ideas, or like right now seemingly crazy ideas or unique ideas. I think Compound and Shelby are the right place to go and to talk about those ideas.
Yeah.
let's stay in this like advice for founders and company design. So when you meet with companies and founders, what do you look for in those first conversations and interactions that signals a company with potentials versus a project that might seem cool but
Yeah.
is just overhyped and doesn't have any potential?
Yeah. A framing I have is that when the founders have thought as much about commercialization and company building as they have about the science, that's a good point in order to spin out. Because ultimately, this founder has to be this founders, when you start a company, you're not just competing against your peers at this time period. You're competing against incumbents in this space, and you're competing against everyone that will start a company in this space in the future. So really looking for like excellence on the business understanding side. Like I said before, like contrary, but very well thought through reasoning, and yeah, creativity as well. I think there's a lot of adjacencies in the biotech space that we're not exploiting yet because the field is still so therapeutics focused. But creativity around like where you can build biotech and for example, science-driven consumer products are a place where we spend a lot of time and think there's a lot of potential, and really big fans of Z-Biotics, for example, and Pendulum Health, and think there's a lot of potential for newcomers to make a splash in that field.
That's a very interesting thought, and let's stay here for a while. Like there's science-driven consumer products, biohacking, which I mean, if you, for our listeners, if you haven't read it, Shelby has a like overall a great blog with amazing ideas, but one of your recent works is the Biohacker's Future, where you basically outline the future of the field until 2029, so like the next 5 years. So maybe a few words about that, what inspired you, and also what you said, the science-driven products. And I think right now the literacy is increasing within normal people, and also the need for kind of new products and the awareness. But I feel the field or like the technology isn't just as fast as we want to, or like as the interest that is in the field. So curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, on the biohacker future or on the consumer side?
Both.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, well, Biohacker Future was really inspired by a team member, Smack, who is a crypto investor on our team that wrote a manifesto 2 years ago about a crypto future and how technology unlocks geopolitical trends and increasing industry understanding by normal people will lead to big shifts in the crypto industry. And I, using his inspiration, wrote the Biohacker Future, which is a similar piece about how the world is changing the individual's ownership of their own health, mainly through different power dynamics that we have, being able to use LLMs in our own health processes. So we're really have expert level knowledge, like super expert level knowledge in our pockets, and everyone has that. New data unlocks that are coming online, things like function health, are interesting because they screen over 100 different health metabolites. But we think people could go further and sequence immune cells. They could biobank their own blood. They could do perturbations on their blood samples to understand how their specific body responds to different medicine or supplements. So yeah, I think the main point of the piece was to create the most ambitious version of what a biohacker future could be, and hopefully spark ideas with people reading it. And yeah, on the technology side for consumers, it's interesting because I feel like there is a lot of low-hanging fruit in, if we just sequence our immune cells, like T cell receptor and B cell receptor sequencing, we could find out a lot about our immune system and what our body's been exposed to. But yeah, I guess for things like that, we've seen it more as like a price problem of like how many people would pay $1,000 to $2,000 for this. Maybe a lot, but I think like pressure testing these ideas and understanding like what is the network effect coming from this test for consumers? What is the data moat? Can the data eventually be sold? How can you be like a Tempest for consumers, for example? Yeah, those are all things that we're thinking about.
So maybe a little bit controversial question, but I feel there's like a lot of people are very interested, like biohacking, like those are huge communities and people are very interested in that. But on the other side, when you ask the medical opinion, there are a lot of cautiousness and a lot of kind of associations for different medical specialties. Say, for instance, something like whole body MRI. A prime example, you shouldn't do that because it's overdiagnosis and you don't need this at some point, and it's not scalable, and it's kind of segregation of different classes in our societies because not everyone can afford it. So curious about your thoughts about that. And also what like second part of the question is, what do you think will our medicine look like in 5 or like in 10 years from now?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's hard on the class segregation side or, only some people having access to these technologies. Yeah, but I think the way to stop that isn't by saying no one can have access to full body MRIs. It's to create sustainable businesses there to where it makes sense and there's credence to economies of scale for rolling it out for like broader swaths of the population. But I do agree, like when we've talked to medical doctors about whole body MRIs, they're typically concerned about incidentalomas, which are unknown masses where you have to do follow-up because they might be cancer, but people end up getting prodded a lot and normally they're fine.
Yeah.
But I think that's a really decelerationist take. I think we should always have more and more access to our data because if it is an incidentaloma and you're doing a full body MRI scan every 6 months, you can see whether it's growing or shrinking or staying the same. And that's really important information that you wouldn't have if you eventually start losing weight and being tired and then have a scan where there's a lump. So I think it's just doctors being worried that it'll be more work on their plate, but not actually looking out for the patient.
I think it's both. So like I do understand both views, and I'm also having my medical background still think that everyone kind of has the full rights to their bodies, and if you want to know, you should know. And it's great that there are companies that offer that, and also basically that like if you want to optimize and if you want to prevent, you should do that because our medical system is still more reactive than proactive. But on the other side, I think the concern is obviously more work for us, and it's not just that we don't have to work, like that we don't want to work, but it's more because of the whole system and like shortage of doctors. And on the other side is unnecessary procedures. For instance, if you have a lump that's benign, but you still, kind of you're thinking about this all the time, and it puts pressure on your mental health and like physical health. I think this is also the component that doctors are like afraid of, that kind of just your mental health and your like overall health quality will decrease versus increase when you do such proactive scannings.
And I really do respect doctors and the medical profession, but I mean, I think I think that's why these are done in separate medical clinics, almost kind of like concierge care, why they're not done in hospital settings. It's because so they won't create more strain on the medical doctors or medical system. But I so what do you think the solution is with full body MRIs?
Well, I think, and I'm talking about myself and not on behalf of other people, other doctors, obviously, just my opinion. I really love it, and I hope, like, right now it's not accessible to everyone, but I think with scale up, with kind of make it more accessible, you will drive the price down. Um, and I hope at some point that we'll have it mandatory for everyone in the country, like Japan, where you have mandatory annual checkups. And this health system works because it's proactive. And when you look at the financials and the life expectancy, they have higher life expectancy and less healthcare cost because they prevent diseases from being worse or like becoming chronic, which is driving expenditures like cost in healthcare systems. So I am hopeful for this to happen.
Definitely. That's great.
So if you had, like, you said that like you're more investor, but but also you have so much knowledge in the space. What do you think is a product that is still lacking in the system, which you wish would be there, or like which you would build yourself if you had the opportunity?
I think the system that would I think would be the most revolutionary for the world would be a brain modulation system and a joint brain recording system where you could record, I don't know, grandmaster chess players, or you could record famous artists, and then institute or initiate the same brain waves on new people, so everyone can feel like a chess grandmaster. Everyone can see what it feels like, and I think being able to scale mastery of many different topics could be the next golden age of the world. So I think it would be brain modulation.
It's a very interesting thought. What do you think would need to happen, or like what are we lacking right now to like from this to happen, or like happening faster than we hope for?
I think it's the neuromodulation technology to be sophisticated enough to not just suppress or initiate emotion. Like transcranial magnetic stimulation has really come a long way in terms of miniaturization and how long people can keep the electrodes on your on your head. But I think more sophisticated modulation is ultimately needed, whereas right now a lot of the modulation devices seem more like a blunt instrument instead of like highly skilled, highly specific, responsive device also to your brain recordings.
That's very interesting thought, and hope to see more in this area in the next few years, months, or weeks. Actually, we are right now at the time, and I have a bunch of other questions also on your writing and on your thesis. So, for every listener who was excited about our small interaction about like different possibilities, if they want to talk to you more, do a little bit more research with you, discuss with you different ideas, how can they reach you? Is there anything that's upcoming next?
Yeah. So, if you're thinking about any of these ideas, please reach out to me at shelby@compound.vc. I'm also on Twitter and LinkedIn, and you can DM me there. And for anyone that's interested in autonomous science or in wearables technology, we're doing back-to-back research days in late April in San Francisco on April 23rd and 24th. So please email me or DM me if you'd like to join those.
Okay, amazing. I think our listeners will have a lot of homework after this episode. And I hope that a lot of Nucleate folks will actually be represented at those research days. So, like, two last questions. So, you've written in one of your blogs is that life is stranger than fiction, but I really love. It's like very optimistic and very like interesting thought and view. So, what would you say? What's the weirdest, strangest, but most promising idea that you've seen in the last year?
That's a good question. I mean, we've seen a lot around geoengineering, which we think is kind of like the final frontier of climate change, of like, how can we not just reverse global warming, but how can we shift our ecosystems to be more sustainable? So yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening there, from cloud seeding to albedo materials reflecting sunlight. So yeah, that's an area that we see like really large growth potential in. Yeah, human enhancement is another big theme, and have seen a lot of different ideas around like gene therapy for increased intelligence. There are some non-human primate studies that show the clotho gene actually helps in memory consolidation and some like cognitive tasks. I think human I think the next I know you mentioned earlier like what's the next instantiation of healthcare. I think it's health enhancement, and I think when we live in a world where most diseases are cured and when embryos are selected to be disease free, I think the next thing that we go towards is how do we optimize us, not prevent us from being sick. So yeah, and I've seen a lot of other people thinking in that same direction, and yeah, we're really pumped about that.
That's amazing. And what would you say, like, what fields are like deserve more serious fundings right now?
There has been a cooling in funding for pandemic preparedness, and but I think it's clear that we'll continue to have pandemics, and those should be taken very seriously. And, anything from like medical countermeasures to vaccines. I think that'll be an important place in the future. I think cancer prevention drugs or disease prevention drugs is also a big place. And where we'd like to see more companies be built. Also we have some fledgling ideas about conservation tech of like for all of the species that are going extinct. There's national programs to, for example, in Australia, to vaccinate all of the koala population against chlamydia. Those are very expensive campaigns, and they mean the governments are spending a lot protecting their precious species and ecosystems. So I think there should be more than one company colossal that's working on conservation technology. And would love to see more built there as well.
So for our listeners out there, if you feel that if you have some ideas in the space, I think I stressed this multiple times already, reach out, talk to Shelby, and go out, I think, and build it and be like, take the risk and be curious, but also bold in your ideas. Final question. So what's a question you wish more people would have asked you, or a thesis that you still kind of chewing on but didn't make it to publication?
Yeah, I have a few fledgling theses around conservation tech and cancer prevention drugs. And so a question I wish people asked me more, historically or now?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. I guess. Yeah, I think why, I don't know, I feel like there's this somewhat negative slant that a lot of people coming from science have, because science is really hard. It takes a long time to get things to work. Most things don't work. But I think more people should approach it from a perspective of expected value instead of near-term probability of success. So I think why, I don't know if this is a why not framing instead of a why never framing. So I guess, I would love people to have a more optimistic and techno-positive slant.
Amazing. And with that optimistic closing, I thought, thank you very much for being in the Nucleate Podcast. We have covered, I think, 30% of the questions that I came with, but it was an amazing, very interesting conversation, and thank you very much for being on the Nucleate Podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Thanks for listening to the Nucleate Podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to keep up with future episodes. See you next time.